Shalom. First and foremost, I want to give all praises, honor, and glory to Yahweh, Bahasham, Yahweh Shai, Bahasham, Recha Kodash. Double honors to the elders and the apostles of Great Millstone, and peace and blessings to the elect. And today we're going to go into the book of Joel, the 3rd chapter. And in this chapter, it's dealing with pretty much end-time prophecy of the Lord recompensing or exacting judgments upon the nations for the sake of Israel. All right. I believe when you read in Psalms, the 83rd chapter, it basically describes the adversaries of the nation of Israel, and at different times how we've been made subject onto them. All right. So this is the book of Joel, chapter 3, verse 1. The nations will be judged. For behold, in those days and in that time, when I shall bring again the captivity of Judah and Jerusalem. So Joel has already set the setting or the timeline for you, that the things that he is about to speak or prophesy about are concerning the time when the Lord begins to, when it says bring again the captivity of Judah and Jerusalem, it means to bring an end or bring us out of captivity, not to put us in captivity again. Okay, so, and we know that this time that Joel is referring to is not, it wasn't referring to us coming out of the Babylonian captivity or the Greek captivity or the Roman captivity, but rather our final captivity. And we know that because all throughout those various captivities, when, we were, say, brought out of it, these events did not take place at that time, right? But they will take place in this time that we are in. So this is Joel chapter 3, verse 2. It says, I also will gather all nations and will bring them down into the valley of Jehoshaphat. The valley of Jehoshaphat, which is also known as in the Hebrew as Yahweh Shaphat, meaning the Most High's judgment, is over there in the quote unquote Middle East, right around the same region that we read in Joel, the 2nd chapter, that the Lord said he would remove the northern army, right, and drive them into that land. So right around that region is where the valley of Jehoshaphat, where the Lord is going to gather these nations, is going to be. Okay. Now, this hasn't happened historically, right, where the Lord gathered all these nations. It's going to happen in this time, otherwise known as World War III. That's why it's known as a world war, because it's going to involve the nations of the world, right? So the Lord says he's going to gather them. He's going to bring them there. And how is he going to do that? He's going to do that by different events, right? By provocation. Right now, primarily you have him using the small hats, right? Or the state of Israel to do what they're doing in that region. And it's stirring up a lot of tension, which eventually, coupled with other world events, will lead to the fulfillment of Joel 2. And it says, and I will plead with them there for my people and for my heritage Israel. And when you go into the word plead, it doesn't mean to beg, right? Like you would think of in the normal sense. The word there in the Hebrew is shapat, which means to judge. So as it says here, to judge, vindicate, punish. Okay. So when the Lord gathers them there, it's really to bring judgment upon them. Though in the eyes of the world and in their mind, they're going to think they're going to war. But the Lord is using that war as a form of bringing judgment upon these nations. So as it says, and will plead with them there, or judge them, for my people and for my heritage Israel, whom they have scattered among the nations. So when and how did this happen? Well, at different points in time. Remember, this is at the latter days, right? The times we are in now. So the Lord is bringing this judgment as a recompense, requiring that which is past. He's looking at all the things that these different nations have done, and the hand and the role they've played in our hurt or our captivity throughout the years, throughout the generations, and he's bringing judgment upon them for it. So when he says, for my people whom they have scattered among the nations, this happened at different points in time when we were subject onto these various nations, and had to flee or had to be carried off into another land to serve captivity. It says here, and parted my land. All right, which is to basically, because you had certain captivities where we were taken out of our land, and our land was basically taken out of our own hands, right? When you go back during the Babylonian captivity, you had Edomites that came up and took parts of our land, our villages, and they had to basically give it back. But when you fast forward even to the time of the Roman captivity, after the siege of Jerusalem, I believe later on, if I remember correctly, I think it was Hadrian who actually gave an order that we couldn't even return back to the land. Right? Hadrian orders Israel not to return back to the land. I guess that's what it's called, Hadrian's Curse. Right. So after the Bar Kokhba revolt, so this was some decades after the Roman Jewish wars, which revolted in the desolation of the temple. It says here, after the Bar Kokhba revolt, the Roman Emperor Hadrian issued edicts that banned Jews from Jerusalem and the surrounding region of Judea. This was a severe punitive measure in response to the massive Jewish uprising against Roman rule. It says here, a ban on entering Jerusalem. Jews were forbidden from entering or even approaching Jerusalem, which Hadrian had rebuilt as a Roman colony named Aelia Capitolina. The only exception was an annual visit on the day of Tisha B'Av to mourn the temple's destruction. In an effort to erase Jewish connection to the land, Hadrian renamed the province Syria Palestina, reviving the name of the Jews' ancient enemies, the Philistines. So, and that was just one account, like one other point in history. But eventually it got to the point where our land was taken from us. We had to flee, and it was divided amongst the heathen. And if you go to this very day, our land has been parted or trodden underfoot of the Gentiles. We don't have it anymore. Though you may have some Israelites dwelling there right now, it's not in our possession. Okay? And right now we are till this day scattered amongst the nations, and that's a result of these heathen nations being our adversaries and us being weak before them. So the Lord is going to bring judgment as a result. Verse 3, and they have cast lots for my people. To cast a lot is like let me see how they word in these other translations. That'll give me the words I'm looking for. Right. So here's an example, right? They threw dice to decide which of my people would be their slaves. So when you cast a lot, it can take like many forms, right? It can be like rolling a dice or flipping a coin, right? But it's basically to like, those kind of events where it feels like it's being left up to chance. It could be either or when you can't decide something right away. Or in this case, having so much abundance, that you just use a lot to decide. But in other words, what it means is they cast a lot for my people and have given a boy for an harlot. So by us being subject onto them, right, and being captives onto them, they did with us as they saw fit. In this case, our people or our sons were traded, for harlots, right? Our daughters, it says, and sold a girl for wine, right? So for these basic things here, at our expense, that they might drink. Yea, and what have I to do, or what have ye to do with me, O Tyre, or Tyre and Zidon? And Tyre and Zidon were of the northwestern coast, okay, of our land, and they were of the sons of Canaan, okay, or the tribe of Canaan, descendants of Canaan, however you want to call that. But the Lord is saying here, basically, like, what what business do you have with me? And all the coast of Palestine, i.e. the Philistines, will he render me a recompense? So are you trying to, like, retaliate? Are you trying to come against me? Are you trying to pay me back? And if so, right, if ye recompense me, swiftly and speedily will I return your recompense upon your own head. So the Lord is saying that I'm gonna return that payback right back on you. Okay. And then the Lord goes into, well, through the mouth of Joel, why he said that. Because they also throughout history had a hand in our affliction. Now in verse 5, it mentions here, because ye have taken my silver and my gold, and have carried into your temples my goodly pleasant things. And this is something that they did per when they had opportunity, right? So when a foreign nation came in there, and different accounts as well, but when a foreign nation came in there and we were subject, right, in the midst of that, they also had a hand in it, okay, in plundering, our goods, our temple, and actually taking our the gold and the silver, okay, and the precious things for themselves, right, along with the neighboring nations like the Edomites and so on and so forth. Okay, and then fast forwarding some more into the future, because remember, like I mentioned, in the book of Joel, the Lord is recounting at different points in time the things that these nations have been guilty of in that was a cause of our affliction or our hurt, and letting them know that I'm gonna basically pay you back for that. Okay, so in verse 6, right, this is something that more so happened a bit more into the future, right? As it says, the children also of Judah and the children of Jerusalem have ye sold unto the Grecians, that ye might remove them far from your border. Now, when you look throughout the history of ancient Israel, right, there wasn't a time when we as Judah or Jerusalem were subject, like to the point of under the those of Tyre and Zidon, to the point where they had enough power over us to sell us as slaves, to, and when you go into the word Grecians, it goes into Javan, which is originally talking about the descendants of Japheth. But going with that, there's no account of that actually being the case, right? As it says that ye might remove them far from their border. When you look into the history of Israel, the captivities, the main captivities, and ones that involved us actually being removed from our land, was during the time of the Assyrians, when the northern kingdom was deported, during the time of the Babylonians, when we were taken from our land and then had to flee, and then fast forwarding during the time of the Romans. Okay, so how then were the people of Tyre and Zidon able to accomplish this, and to what Grecians did they sell us? This was what we know in more modern terms as the slave trade, right? Because the inhabitants of Tyre and Zidon, the descendants of Canaan, which today are known as Africans, right, or ultimately out of the classifications of the sons of Noah, they would be descendants of Shem, as to where the children of Judah and Jerusalem would be descendants, Salakia, the Hamites would be descendants of Ham, as to where the children of Judah and Jerusalem would be descendants of Shem. And due to the persecution, mainly during the time of the Roman period, a bulk of the Israelites, particularly the southern kingdom, fled into different parts of the world, majority into the interiors of Africa. And in the interiors of Africa, or on the coast of Africa, you also had the dwellings of the Hamites. Okay, a portion of them being descendants of Tyre, a portion of them being descendants of Zidon, because eventually they all got moved out of their land as well. Because when you go over there to that land of Palestine right now, it's not the original inhabitants that are there. Okay, both of Israel and of the heathens. So majority of the actual Canaanites that used to dwell in the land of Canaan have now are now dwelling in Africa. All right, and so it was during that time when, as it says, the children of Judah, also of Judah, and the children of Jerusalem, when we had fled into those places, i.e., Africa, when Esau came there, because when it talks about the Grecians here, is really referring to Esau, Edom, and we know that because what they ended up doing, when you go into history, the original Greeks were Japhetic. They were descendants of Japheth, right? When you go into the word Grecians, it goes into Javan, which is talking about the descendants of Japheth, right? So the Etruscans and the Mycenaeans and Minoans and so on. But throughout history, the Edomites came up into their lands okay, and eventually drove them out while retaining that identity of calling themselves Greeks and Romans and so on, okay? And so when it mentions the Grecians here, it's referring to really the Edomites, all right, that are known today as Greeks, or, they basically taken on these identities. So going, recounting the verse again, what the Lord is saying here is the children of Judah were sold, right, by the Hamites, which, when you do the research, you'll find out that during that time of the slave trade, you also did have Israelites that were selling other Israelites. But the bulk of the majority of what was happening was the Hamite nations, right, or tribes that were on that land, that continent of Africa, sold Israelites that were also there onto the Grecians, or the Edomites, okay? And for different things, guns, silverware, money, whatever, wine, whatever, all those things. And as a result, we were carried, all right, away from that land and brought here to the land of Babylon and other parts of the world to serve captivity, right, to be slaves. So when it says here that ye might remove them far from their border, though at the time we weren't directly in the land of Israel, right, because we had fled from persecution, we were closer to the land because Africa is connected, right? If you a lot of even during the time of the birth of Yahushua, Joseph and Mary fled into Africa, right? So by us being sold off the different coasts and ports of Africa, we were removed further away from our actual land, which is the land of Israel. So the Lord is saying, because you did that, right, and you partook in that, behold, I will raise them up out of the place whither ye have sold them. So yes, we were sold and we were sent to, that's why it's called a trade, a slave trade. We were sent to different parts of the world, but primarily the bulk of Israelites were brought here to America. And it is also here that the Lord is going to raise up his people. Okay, so as it says, I will raise them up out, out of the place whither ye have sold them. And what does that look like? Well, we came here as slaves. We were brought down to the point of not being able to read and write. We were considered 3/5 of a person. But the Lord is now raising us up, first spiritually, right? Ezekiel 37, right? Spiritually, mentally, and then ultimately in all facets to the point of our deliverance. And will return your recompense upon your own head. So now I'm going to raise them up from where they were sold to serve captivity, right? And I'm going to return that. I'm going to repay you for doing that, for having sold them. In verse 8, and so it goes on to expound, right? And I will sell your sons and your daughters, since you sold mine, I'm going to sell yours into the hand of the children of Judah, right? The ones who you sold, I'm going to sell your sons and daughters into their hand. And they shall sell them to the Sabians. So when the Lord says he's going to sell their sons and daughters to the children of Judah, what it means is he's going to give them as a prey to us, to where we'll take them over and they'll be subject unto us, and we will be able to sell them as servants and slaves, as it says, to the Sabians. And the Sabians here were known for, like, being like merchant people, because there were particular groups that were often travel, right, and they would have different resources, from actual people to spices or whatever the case is, gold, silver, and they would trade. So that's why it mentions here the Sabians, as it says, to a people far off, for the Lord Yahweh hath spoken it. And how and when is this going to happen? It's not going to be now, because we don't have that. We don't have that power. We don't have that position. The Lord hasn't granted that to us. And it didn't. And historically, he didn't. This didn't really take place as a result of the things we went through, because at the point in time when Israel had dominion over those of Tyre and Zidon, they hadn't sold us to the Grecians yet. The reason the Lord says in verse 8 he's going to do that is as a result of them having sold us to the Grecians, and us having been hurt at their hand, right? So after we were actually sold to the Grecians, we've never been in a position of power to be able to have this done or have this fulfilled, which goes to show you that this is something that's going to happen in the future, right? A prophecy in the future. And it's going to come along or in that day where the Lord turns away or turns back our captivity. Verse 9, proclaim ye this among the Gentiles, prepare war, wake up the mighty men, let all the men of war draw near. And this is happening in our time now. In fact, recently in the U.S. they renamed the Department of Defense to the Department of War, and the theme has just been war, war, war. What's going on? You have the situation with Russia and Ukraine. You have the situation with Israel over there in the east. You know, it's all war themed, and what that means is you have a lot more nations that are preparing, calling troops out of basically getting all their reserves in order, doing war games. You have nations forming alliances with other nations in case things should escalate. They know who's backing who. So that's the preparation of war, right? It says here, let the men of war draw near, let them come up. Because remember, as we read up above, the Lord is determined to gather these nations. So he is preparing, he's waking them up and putting them in a warlike mindset, understanding that war is coming. And then eventually he's going to have them draw near and gather in that region. Beat your plowshares into swords and your pruning hooks into spears. And plowshares are used for plowing, right? To break up the earth, to plant the seeds. And that's during the time of, you have that during the time of peace, mainly time of agriculture, because that's where you invest your time, your resources into. But here it's saying, cut that, right? Like today it would be like reinvest, rather than your spending and how to improve your resources and so on. You got to put it now into weapons. In this case, weapons of war. In the ancient world, swords and spears were used for war. In this time, the modern day swords and spears are missiles, nuclear weapons, missile defense systems, nuclear submarines. And that's where a majority of these countries are investing into. That's why you'll hear every so often this country bought this off of, this nation and so on and so forth. Because they're all preparing for war. As it says, and your pruning hooks into spears, let the weak say, I am strong. And what will cause the quote unquote weak or weaker nations to say I am strong? One, forming alliances, war alliances with stronger nations, but also getting their hands or acquiring dangerous technology. Because in the ancient world, if you were a smaller nation, you couldn't equal, right? There was no equalizer unless you formed an alliance with a bigger nation, because your army and their army would come with swords. You would come with spears, right? You would come with shields, bows, and arrows. But if they had more spearmen or more swords or elephants, or more archers, you were done, right? So you were just that. Today, however, you could be a smaller nation. Your military might not be that big, but if you have nuclear weapons, you can do as much damage, if not more, than a nation with a larger military. As long as you're strategic with it, so that those missiles basically equal, right? They equalize the battlefield. Verse 11, assemble yourselves and come, O ye heathen, and gather yourselves together round about. And that's that vortex, right? That's happening over there. That's going to draw all these nations to basically send their forces to that region. All right, in the east, that's going to be the main. And if you notice throughout history, that place has really been the main place of war. Majority of wars, a good amount of wars revolving around or involving Israel have been in that region of what the world calls the Middle East. Not all wars, of course. As it says, thither calls thy mighty ones to come down, O Yahweh, right? And the mighty ones of the Lord are the angels. Because during this time, right, it won't be long before the angels being led by Yahushai make their return, right? The scriptures tell you in Matthew 24, immediately after the tribulation of those days, i.e. Jacob's trouble, shall they see the Son of Man. Because when those missiles get shot off, the Lord needs to be here if he's going to deliver his elect. And those angels are going to play a role in 2nd Ezra 13, right? It mentions one realm against another. Revelation was at 12 about there was war in heaven, right? Michael and his angels fought against the dragon and his angels. Verse 12. And what that means is you're going to have the Lord with his heavenly armies against the nations of the earth and their technology, their fighter jets and, warplanes and so on, and they're going to lose miserably. Let the heathen be wakened and come up to the valley of Jehoshaphat. And when it says, let them be wakened, let me see, a quick precept that came to mind here is, because they're already awake, right? But what it means is let them put on a certain mindset, awaken a certain mindset within them. Let me see. Yeah, in Ezekiel 38:8, it goes into basically the reawakening of that warlike spirit in Russia, right? That the Lord would do and cause them to come into the land, right? And cause them to basically come for war. And Ezekiel 38:8, I'm just going to go, deal with really the first part here because I want to deal with the word visited. But it says here, after many days thou shalt be visited. In the latter years thou shalt come into the land that is brought back from the sword, right? Which is dealing with the land of Israel. And when you go into the word visited, Quad, it says to attend to muster, to visit, to reckon, right? To appoint, to assign, be needed. See? So what it's saying here is that the Lord, and after many days, meaning in the last days, in the latter times, the Lord would appoint, right? Or set up Russia to play this role that you read of in Ezekiel the 38th chapter. So when we go back to Joel 3 and it talks about let the heathen be wakened, it's not that they were asleep per se, but there's a certain spirit that's going to be aroused or awakened within them, right? See, to arouse, to awake, to incite, for what? For war. It says, and come up to the valley of Jehoshaphat, for there will I sit to judge all the heathen round about. So the Most High is going to be orchestrating it all, right? In triggering, one nation and another. When you read in 2nd Ezra 15, right, it mentions, and the Carmanians raging in wrath shall come and join them, right? Meaning to join the battle. So the Lord is strategically orchestrating who's going to start it, who's going to be drawn in first, what nation that's going to eventually pull in. And all of that is going to be to their destruction, because when it's all said and done, their armies are going to be exhausted, their resources are going to be exhausted, and they're all going to be defenseless before the Lord, right? Before Yahushua. Verse 13, put ye in the sickle, for the harvest is ripe. And that analogy is based on harvest time, right? Because you'd have the reapers with an actual sickle, and they would go about cutting, the crops or the harvest and binding it into sheaves. And that would be like reaping, for example. Come, get you down, for the press is full, right? And this verse is saying that the time is right for this event to take place. In fact, it's so right. It's like when the harvest is ready and you got to go and reap it, right? Or when the grapes are in the wine press and you got to come down and stomp on it so we can get the new wine. Right. So when it says here, get you down, the press is full. It's talking about the wine press where you would actually pour the grapes into and then you would stomp on it. So come down in here and tread with us because it's full. The fats overflow. The fats are referring to the wine fat, as sometimes it is called. When you're treading and treading and treading. Let me just pull it up so you get a visual. Or wine vat. Let me type in here. Here we go. Yeah, this is or wine press, many different names for it, but you would tread and tread and tread and tread, and then it would as you're treading, the blood of the grapes will pour in there. So as it says, it overflows. For their wickedness is great. So the Lord has a certain time by which these judgments are gonna take place, and that time is it correlates with this wickedness that these nations are committing. All right, so it's almost in sync, right? At the time when the judgment comes, it's going to be the perfect time where the Lord says, all right, now it's time to put an end to your wickedness and your wicked reign, starting with Esau, Edom. And I just want to look into the word fats here. Yeah, wine vat or wine press. Cool. So let's continue on. Verse 14. Multitudes, multitudes in the valley of decision. And it's called the valley of decision because that's where the Lord has decided to gather them and bring judgment, right? Or otherwise known as the valley of Jehoshaphat. For the day of the Lord Yahweh is near in the valley of decision. The sun and the moon shall be darkened, and the stars shall withdraw their shining. Remember, going back to Joel 2, he mentioned a day of darkness and gloominess. And one of the causes of this is going to be, with all the bombs hitting, these explosions cause smoke. And the buildup of that smoke eventually is going to get so thick that it starts to it causes the darkness upon the face of the earth or upon those particular regions, because the smoke is so thick, it starts to block out the lights of the sun. That's why it mentions the sun and the moon being darkened and the stars withdrawing their shining. The sun, the moon, the stars, they're still going to do what they do in the heavens, but the effect of them being darkened comes when something is blocking them, like an eclipse, or in this case, like that smoke, or even the barrage of missiles flying in the sky. The Lord also shall roar out of Zion, and shall utter his voice from Jerusalem. And I think Ezekiel 38 has a similar wording here, because when this happens, when this judgment takes place, the Lord is gonna, his energy is gonna go up, so to speak. Ezekiel 38, and let's see. I think it was I think it's and verse 18, it says, and it shall come to pass that at the same time when Gog shall come against the land of Israel, saith the Lord, that my fury shall come up in my face, for in my jealousy and in the fire of my wrath have I spoken. Surely in that day there shall be a great shaking in the land of Israel. And I want to read this in another translation and see if they, here it is, right? NLT, it says, but this is what the sovereign Lord says, when Gog invades the land of Israel, my fury will boil over. Okay, in NIV, it says, when Gog attacks the land of Israel, my hot anger will be aroused. So that's sort of in line with that roar, right, out of Zion. And as it says, utter his voice from Jerusalem. Because remember, the Lord has been long suffering. This judgment isn't something he just decided yesterday. It's been something a long time coming. And once it finally, it's in the midst of being fulfilled, it's going to be that's why it's going to be a time like never before. And the heavens and the earth shall shake. And why is that? Because it says, I believe in Isaiah as well, the earth shall reel to and fro like a drunkard. So it's going to shake because there's going to be so much going on. You're going to have earthquakes, right? You're going to have the force of the missiles hitting different parts of the world, right? If if something hits the left side, it's going to cause a shaking, right? But imagine being hit on the left side, on the right, because you have missiles hitting in the east, you have missiles hitting in the west, right? From one end of heaven to another, shall they travel? So that's going to be causing a shaking on both sides. But the Lord Yahweh will be the hope of his people, and starting with the elect, because when all when all this is going on, the the elect of the Lord are going to put their hope and trust in the Lord, right? To hoping to be delivered, and the strength of the children of Israel, all right? Because it's going to be through the Lord that we are going to be delivered from this situation. And if we didn't have that, well, then I think we all know what that means. Verse 17, so shall ye know that I am the Lord your God, dwelling in Zion, my holy mountain. And the scriptures say the Lord is known in the judgment which he executeth. So when this comes to pass, not only is Israel going to know, but the whole world is going to know, right? That, yeah, this is the God of the Hebrews, just like they did after he brought judgment upon ancient Egypt. Then shall Jerusalem be holy, because once this great judgment comes to pass, then comes the institution of the kingdom of heaven, where there's a reset. And Jerusalem, representing Israel, becomes that sanctified, separate, and holy nation again. And there shall be no strangers, and there shall no strangers pass through her anymore. So our land is going to become sacred again, right? In other words, no nations, no heathens are going to come and conquer us or take over us or our land anymore. Verse 18, and it shall come to pass, right? Judah shall be blessed. And it shall come to pass in that day that the mountains shall drop down new wine, and the hills shall flow with milk, and all the rivers of Judah shall flow with waters. And a mountain shall come forth, or a fountain shall come forth of the house of the Lord Yahweh, and shall water the valley of Shittim. And this is ultimately going into the establishment of Israel, right, and the flourishing of our land, right, getting the resources, the forces of the Gentiles, just that fruitfulness. Because on the literal sense, right, when it mentions the mountains dropping new wine comes from grapes, and vine trees or grapevines also do grow on the sides of mountains as well, right? So, but at that time when it mentions that new wine in another translation, I think it's like sweet wine, we're gonna the land is gonna yield to us, the best, okay, of the vegetation and the resources, and as it says, and the hills shall flow with milk. When you go into the word milk, one of the definitions there is a metaphor, or figuratively speaking, of abundance, right? It says here, milk, abundance of the land. So oftentimes you hear the scriptures talk about the land of milk and honey, or flowing with milk and honey. It's just it's just another way of saying that it's going to be abundant, okay, in resources, in in riches, in everything that you would need or desire from it. And also the mountains and the hills represent Israel, right? On a symbolic sense, right? On the physical sense, yes, you're going to have the land actually be rejuvenated, right? Be made alive again. The rivers of Judah shall flow with waters, right? And the fountain shall come forth, and that's going to bring forth life. But on a symbolic level, right? We know that oftentimes in the scriptures, mountains are used figuratively to represent like a government or a body. And when you read in the book of Isaiah, it mentions that the mountain of the Lord's government is going to be on the top of all the other mountains. Now, when you look into the word here, shall drop new wine, right? Because at this time, when the Lord restores Israel, the land starts to flourish again, right? And when the kingdom of heaven is established and instituted, the laws and the ways of righteousness, right, of the Heavenly Father are also going to be in effect, right, and are also going to be instituted or implemented by the Lord's government or by his mountain. And when you go into the word here, shall drop, in the Hebrew is in the top, and it says here to drop, drip, prophesy, preach, discourse, right, to drop prophecy. Now, or here as it says figuratively, to speak by inspiration. Now we know that in the kingdom, we're not going to prophesy in the sense that we do now. Okay. Now, but the way that we as the mountain or the government of the Lord is going to quote unquote prophesy or discourse the new wine, which spiritually would be what we know today as the truth. But what the truth really is to lead you to a better way of life, right? A way of a way of righteous living through the following the statutes of Yahweh Ba'ashem Yahweh Shai. And so the way that we're going to do that is by implementing, right, the righteousness and the ways of Yahweh Ba'ashem Yahweh Shai throughout the whole earth. And when you go to the book of Isaiah 11, right, it says here, they shall not hurt nor destroy in all my holy mountain. For the earth shall be full of the knowledge of the Lord Yahweh as the waters cover the sea. Now we know that amongst Israel, we're not going to need to basically teach anybody anything, but these nations are going to need to have a re-education. All right. And that's that's going to happen, basically over time. And when all is said and done, the ways of Yahweh Ba'ashem Yahweh Shai are going to be implemented or spread forth throughout the whole earth, like we read in Isaiah 11th chapter. Okay. And that's going to be by flourishing or issued through the government or the mountain of Yahweh Ba'ashem Yahweh Shai. Verse 19, Egypt shall be a desolation, and Edom shall be a desolate wilderness. Now, this Egypt is mainly referring to the spiritual Egypt, all right, which is why it's also linked here with Edom. It's not necessarily the direct lands, okay, of Egypt and Edom, even though we know the land of Israel is going to be hit during that time, and the original land of Edom was like bordering south of Judah, but here is referring to America, okay, because Babylon the Great, or America, is what's going to be that desolate wilderness, and it's also known as spiritual, right, Egypt. Isaiah 19 is a prophecy concerning it as well. And we also know that because the ancient land of Egypt is still going to be habitable, right? It's not going to become a desolation. And when you read in the book of in Zechariah, it mentions that in the kingdom, once everything is set up, it says, and it shall be that whoso will not come up of all the families of the earth to worship, or onto Jerusalem to worship the King, the Lord Yahweh of hosts, even upon them shall be no rain. So you're going to have, once the kingdom of heaven is instituted in Israel, or the mountain of the Lord's government is established, these nations are going to be subject, and they're going to come following the ways of Yahweh Ba'ashem Yahweh Shai. And those that refuse to do that, they're not going to get rain, and that's going to be very devastating upon them. And if the family of Egypt go not up and come not, they have no rain, or that they have no rain, there shall be the plague, wherewith the Lord Yahweh will smite the heathen that come not up to keep the Feast of Tabernacles. Well, how is Egypt going to do that if they're made a desolate wilderness, right, or a desolation? This shall be the punishment of Egypt, and the punishment of all nations that come not up to keep the Feast of Tabernacles. Okay, so that Egypt here that's going to be made a desolation is really referring to the spiritual Egypt, which is Babylon the Great, or America, and that's why it's linked here with Edom. For the violence against the children of Judah, because they have shed innocent blood in their land. And I trust that I don't need to go into detail as to, or examples as to the violence that Esau has showed against us. Okay, from while we were in the land all the way, they basically chased us across time. They chased us across prophecy. They chased us when we were in the land, when we weren't in the land. Esau, Edom committed committed atrocities to Israel. They came to war against us when we were coming into the land. When the Babylonians came against us, they came there and they helped them. And then when they came up into power as the Greeks, they committed atrocities against us. As the Romans, they committed atrocities against us. As the Europeans, they committed atrocities against us. They brought us into this land and continued to commit atrocities and shed the blood of Israel. So the Lord is witnessing all of that. And to the Lord, he's not seeing Greeks, Romans, Spaniards. It's all the same spirits, right? It's all the same nation. So they're going to be recompensed accordingly. But Judah shall dwell forever, and Jerusalem from generation to generation, meaning we're going to be established, and literally we're going to become immortal, right? We're going to have that everlasting life, pursuant to Revelation 21 and also 1 Corinthians 15, and many other precepts. For I will cleanse their blood that I have not cleansed, for the Lord Yahweh dwelleth in Zion. So the Lord is going to make us pure, right, holy, and eternal. And that brings us to the end of the book of Joel, the 3rd chapter, as well as the end of the entire book of Joel. And, you know, in this chapter is mainly about the Lord bringing judgment upon these nations, right, and recompensing upon them via, you know, war and also captivity for the things that they have done against Israel. And on the flip side, restoring Israel and blessing us. So with that, Lord willing, this is edifying to the elect. In closing, I want to give all praises, honor, and glory to Yahweh, Bahasham, Yahushai, Bahasham, Recha Kudash. And until next time, Shalom.